Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Let's see what we have here. Okay. Um, okay. Let's get started. Of course, if you would like to hold on one second. If you would like to sponsor a class, we really appreciate it. When we get sponsorships, helps us to help keep doing this class. Okay. Okay, and officially, I just put a donate link in the description or something like that. So, either way, you can send us a message. We really appreciate that. And let's jump right in. This week's Torah portion, Parsha's Ba'aleischa, talks about the manna. That's how they call it in English. The heavenly bread that came down to the Jewish people. So let's jump right in the description of the man. How does the Torah describe this heavenly bread that came down from heaven for the Jewish people to eat while they were in the desert? Obviously, in the desert, there's no agriculture, there's no supermarkets. So how do they have food? They have the manna. So he says in Numbers chapter 11, "V'haman kizera gadhu ve'enoi kein habadaleach." The manna was like a coriander seed and it appeared like a crystal. Okay, so what does the Torah tells us? The people walked about and gathered it. Then they cooked it in a mill or crushed it in a mortar, cooked it in a pot, and made it into cakes. It had a taste like the taste of oil cake. When the dew descended on the camp at night, the manna would descend upon it. Okay, so essentially these little white seeds, they would gather it, bring it home. And let's go into what the Medrash tells us. The Medrash tells us that actually, this is the Medrash Rabbi in Shemais. The book of Exodus tells us that the manna actually tasted like whatever you wanted. He says as follows: for these 40 years, God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. What does lack nothing mean? When one craved a specific food and said, "I wish I had fatty meat to eat," the manna would immediately taste like fatty meat. Whatever they said, God made it happen. Okay, so let's dive into that a little further, because there seems to be some contradictory texts between some of what in this week's Torah portion in Numbers 11 and in Exodus chapter 16 about what happened with the manna. So, for example, in our Torah portion it says, "And when the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell upon it." That's in this week's Torah portion. However, in Exodus it says, "And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day." So we see in our Torah portion it says, "The dew fell upon the camp." In Exodus it says, "They shall go out." And over here it says, "The people went about and gathered it." So which one is it? Did they have to leave the camp or it came to the camp? Three almost different ways of saying it. So the Talmud tells us in Tractate Yoma as follows: "For the righteous, the manna fell to opening their homes. They expended no effort at all. The average people went out of the camp and gathered what fell there. The wicked had to go out farther to gather. The manna is called bread, cakes, and so that's the first contradiction. One second. Yeah, the first contradiction is three different verses, two in this week's Torah portion, one in Exodus. Sounds like the manna fell different places, and we learn from the Talmud tells us that we learn that it depended on how righteous you were. If you were very righteous, you went out right out your door. If you weren't so righteous, you had to go farther. If you're really righteous, you had to walk a few thousand feet. Okay. Then he continues. The manna is called bread in Exodus, cakes in our Torah portion, and then again in our Torah portion it says ground into mills, or ground in mills, implying that it was neither bread nor cake. So how can these texts be rectified? So the Talmud says again, for the righteous it fell as baked breads. For average people it fell as unbaked cakes. So basically they still had to do some sort of preparation. And for the wicked it came in an unprocessed form, and consequently they ground it in a mill. Okay. So depending on the person, that was how the manna fell. Okay. So now the next question we're going to have about the manna is, what blessing did they make on the manna? We all know when we make when we eat bread, we say the blessing Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, which means the one who brings forth bread from the earth. Now, obviously, the manna did not come from the earth. The manna came from heaven. So the Bnei Yisachar, he says they didn't have to make a blessing. In a different book, we have the Vayitzbar Yosef. He says that you depended on what it tasted like. We said before that the manna would taste like whatever you wanted. So if it tasted like whatever food it tasted like, that was the blessing you made. So if it tasted like fruit, you made a blessing. Blessed be you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who created fruit from the tree, because that's what it tasted like. Then we have a interesting responsa from the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, and he says as follows. And he quotes Rabbi Menachem Azariah, and he says, Mipano, also known as the Rameh Mipano, and he says that in the future we're going to eat the manna that was saved in the Holy Temple. At there's a commandment in the Torah that God commands Moses and Aaron to take a portion of manna, put it in a jug, and put it in the Holy Ark. And so the future generations will be able to see that God took care of the Jewish people, even when they had nothing. So he says we're going to make that. What are we going to eat? What blessing are we going to make in the future when Mashiach comes? We're going to have a great feast, and at the feast we're going to have the Leviathan and the Shor Habar, this big giant fish and a giant ox. It's a whole story. He says we're going to make the blessing Hamotzi lechem min hashamayim, which means the one who brings forth bread from the heavens. Okay. Now, if we're calling it bread from the heavens, this is very serious, right? Bread from the heavens, that's something that's very different than bread from the earth. In other words, the other opinions that we brought before, they didn't make a blessing. We made a blessing based on what it tasted like. Here we're saying that no, it's actually bread from heaven. It's obviously going to have a different quality based on this explanation. Now, as we said before, the righteous people, they didn't have to do any work, but this bread from heaven came ready to go. And even for all the people, whether they had to walk far or not to get their manna, the Torah tells us that there was no waste, right? Since it was totally holy bread, it didn't come from the earth, which has good parts and bad parts, nutritionally valuable things and non-nutritionally valuable things. The body processed it, and instead of having waste, it would just absorb everything. It was all good. And even for the wicked, even for people who seemingly were wicked. And so the question is, if they were wicked, and to the point where God made them go out of their way to go get the manna, we see that that in some way they never changed from the wicked ways, even though they were eating holy bread, holy food. And so it seems that it never really. So in other words, they still were still wicked, but in some way it must have affected them, right? Because at the end of the day, it became part of them. It became part of their body. As we know, food becomes part of you. So, and there were some very wicked people. There were people who were worshiping idols in the desert, etc. So, however, if we look that our sages tell us that the Torah specifically was given to the people who ate the manna. In other words, that these people were under a tremendous influence from the manna, to the point to all the Jewish people that they were able to actually receive the Torah. In other words, that this obviously the manna must have had some sort of effect. And so what effect did it have? If it must have had a small effect that basically eventually, when they would repent, or in the future when Mashiach comes, whatever it is, when they do repent, this will kind of be like the culmination of that, where this, meaning it has an effect, but it hasn't been revealed the effect yet. That's kind of what we're getting at. Okay. So let's get into some practical Jewish law that has to do with manna. You're going to ask me, Rabbi, how is practical Jewish law going to have anything to do with manna? There's no manna. And we already said, okay, there's something when Mashiach comes, maybe we'll eat some manna. Okay, what does that have to do? As follows. This is brought in Jewish law. What happens if you show up, let's say you show up to a synagogue on Shabbos, and they don't have a Jewish calendar like the one that Chabad Duluth makes, or your local Jewish community makes, where it has all the times and has all Torah portions and everything that's going on Jewishly that week. So let's say you don't have such a calendar for whatever reason, and nobody knows what Torah portion it is. Nobody knows. They have amnesia from last week. They don't remember what they have no idea. So what's the law? The law is as follows. I'll just read it inside. One who is far away from a Jewish community on Shabbos and does not know which Torah reading is that week should read the portion of the manna because it was said on Shabbos. Okay? The Torah portion of the manna was said on Shabbos, so therefore we should read it on Shabbos. There's a connection between Shabbos and the manna, so therefore it's good Torah portion to read. However, seemingly this is very strange. If you want to have something that's connected to Shabbos, you know what else was said on Shabbos? The Ten Commandments. That sounds like a really good Torah portion to read. If you have nothing better to read, why not read the Ten Commandments? Why not read something else? Why specifically the Torah portion of the manna? Yes, it was said on Shabbos, but the Ten Commandments were also said on Shabbos. So let's see what's the connection between Shabbos and the manna. So, and something special about Shabbos. The manna, as we said before, it somehow affected somebody, even though they never really changed. In other words, the manna didn't change people. You didn't eat it and become holy and become righteous. That's not the way the world works, right? People, if you want to become righteous, you have to put in the work. You have to repent, take good resolutions, etc. But the manna, it could help you. It could be a good boost. But if you're not going to put in the work, it's not going to help anything. But there's some way it does affect a person. And so Shabbos also has that quality. So let's go to the Talmud. In Tractate Demai, it discusses what happens if a person buys fruit from somebody else. And in the Talmud, in Tractate Demai, discusses what do you do if you buy from someone who's not trustworthy to take the proper tithing in the land of Israel. So we all know, in the land of Israel, there are different tithes. There's Truma, that's 10%. I'm sorry, Truma is 1/50th, between 1/50th, that's the average separation. Then there's Meiser, that's a tithing, that goes to the Levi, that's 10%, etc., etc., etc. So we don't trust the person to take these tithes, specifically the tithing that's after the Truma tithing. Okay, I don't want to get stuck in the details. So the question is, I bought it from somebody who is not trustworthy, and I forgot to do it myself. So in other words, the law is, since this person is not trusted to take the tithes, when I bring it home, I have to take the tithes myself, and then then you're able to eat it. Okay, and again, according to Jewish law, you're not allowed to eat this food before it's been tithed. So what if the question here is that a person bought it on Friday and the person was not trustworthy. He got home, he forgot about it. He was busy with Shabbos, he was cooking the chalent, he was tasting the kugel, he was taking a shower, whatever it was, he was busy, totally forgets about the tithing. But now on Shabbos, you're not allowed to tithe. Why not allowed to tithe? Again, not to get too stuck in the details, but tithing is a form of making something it's making something that was not before not permitted. You're making it permitted. You're making it edible, and that is considered a violation of Shabbos because you took something from not being able to be used and you made it usable. That's a violation of the Shabbos. Okay, so what do you do? The rabbis say as follows. The rabbis say you're allowed to honor. You're allowed to ask. You're allowed to ask him, and you rely on what the person said. Even though he's usually not trustworthy, you're allowed to rely on him on Shabbos. So the rabbi says, why is that allowed? He said because of the honor of the Shabbos. Okay, so meaning because of Shabbos you're not going to have food. Essentially, it seems like what the answer is. You're not going to have food, so in honor of Shabbos, we allow it. So he says, no, that's not the answer. Because if that was the case, then we shouldn't even have to ask. Because, what do you mean? An honor of Shabbos? I could rely that this person is trustworthy all of a sudden. The Rabbi said, no, no, no. You're allowed to ask and you're allowed to rely on the fact that he says that he took the proper tithes. So Rabbi Bibi says, in the name of Rabbi Chanina, the awe of the Shabbos is upon them, and they will tell the truth. So we see here that the light of Shabbos, the fact that it's Shabbos in the world, makes a person not say a falsehood. Even though this person, the 5 minutes before Shabbos, he's not considered trustworthy. 5 minutes after Shabbos, he's not considered trustworthy. But on Shabbos, this special day, something happened. He's not changing his life. He's not becoming a trustworthy person. But on for those 25 hours, he's trustworthy. And we see this is a similar thing we see by the manna. That by the manna, because for those during that when the person ate the manna, that person became somehow it changed that person in some way, and therefore when we have an option, we don't know what to read on Shabbos, we read the portion of manna because it was said on Shabbos. In other words, there's a connection between Shabbos and the manna that they both affect the person in some way, even the person never changes. But for those few minutes that the person is eating the manna, or in our scenario, where a person is experiencing the Shabbos, he's a different person, he's not going to tell a lie. Okay, let's do a quick lesson that we can learn from the manna. The Torah tells us we see here there are two types of bread. We have regular bread, lechem min haaretz, and we have lechem min hashamayim, heavenly bread and earthly bread. And when it comes to Torah, there are two ways to study Torah, two parts of the Torah. There's the earthly part of the Torah. That's what we generally are involved with in the Torah, studying the Bible, Chumash, studying the Talmud, studying the Mishnah, studying Jewish law. This is the earthly bread. We're dealing with things that are involved in the earth. We're trying to figure out what is the law. What are we trying to? What is going on? Explaining what's going on in the world based on the Torah. Explaining how do we relate to the world. However, there's a second part of Torah. It's the inner dimension of Torah, which we call Chassidus or Kabbalah. When a person studies that part of Torah, that part of Torah is a whole different thing. That's the heavenly part of the Torah. And there's no struggle. There's no questions. And you look in the Talmud, it's all it is questions. You look in the Zohar, there's no questions. And the Zohar addresses this. And he says in the Zohar that in the Torah, in this inner dimension of Torah, there is no questions. Because it comes from a pure place where there are no questions. And so the question is, okay, so I might think if I'm going to study Torah, I need to know what to do. I need to only study Talmud and Mishnah and Jewish law. Okay, maybe that's true. That's important. But if we have an opportunity to share with somebody the words of Chassidus, the words of this inner dimension of Torah, this heavenly Torah, we have the opportunity to engage in this study. This is something that's life-changing, to the point where, like we said before about the manna, about the Shabbos, that at those moments a person is not able to tell a lie, where there's no questions. We can uplift a person to that level, and we hope that spark will give the person the opportunity to actually go about and change his life. So whenever you have an opportunity to study Chassidus, which is something that we do very often on this class or any other time, not to say that we shouldn't study Talmud. Of course, we have to study Talmud. It's very important because we have to know what to do. We have to know, and this is what most of what the Torah study is. We have to struggle through life. That's how it goes. But when we have an opportunity to study Chassidus for at least part of our Torah study, it's a tremendous opportunity to bring us and uplift us, just like the man uplifted the people who ate it, just like Shabbos uplifts all people on the day of Shabbos. Thank you very much for joining, and God willing, we will see you next week.